I will just welcome my esteemed co-panelists. First, I'd like to invite Anton Espira, who is the founder of Solibrium and Solibrium. He was seated behind me and I see he's on his way. Edward Isingoma, managing partner, Pearl Capital Partners. Amandine, yes, please. De Rosnay, Head of Sustainability and Inclusive Growth of Business in Mauritius. Sonia Orwa, Country CEO, Mr. Green Africa. And Joachim Westerveld, who is a CEO at Highlands Drinks and Biofood Products. Welcome. So I think to catch up with the time, I'll just invite each of the speakers to give a broad, well, I would say a brief view of the overarching theme for this particular panel, which is about business sustainability and really sustainable finance, or what we're saying, smart finance. I think some of us have been at the summit, and one of the things I can say that I've observed in several of the discussions is the financing gap for Africa. You know, the Africa Development Bank says we need $200 billion per year to meet the SDGs by 2030 as a continent. Of course, we also need to mobilize private sector capital. We need to support businesses in ensuring their models are sustainable. So again, this is what we hope to unpack as we discuss. But first, I'll welcome Sonia, just to give a little brief about yourself and of course the theme. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I'm Sonia Orwa, the country CEO of Mr. Green Africa, and I think I can brag here very loudly that we are the first recycling and waste management company in all of Africa to be B Corp certified. So I say that a lot and I feel very proud to be sitting here and saying that as well. And I'd say, Mr. Green, we're mainly focused on turning waste into value, and plastic is our core waste product that we work with. And so very excited to hear from Giovanna about that is the focus, as we know. And when it comes to this topic, I think what is very key is about, of course, when you look at the circular economy, a very big buzzword, right? I think I like to call it a buzzword because it's said all over the place, but nobody really understands. Many people know it's very, very practical, right? So when Mr. Green came in and started in 2014, the idea was we had two problems we solve. There is enough plastic in the environment today that if we banned all plastic, Mr. Green would still be in business for 50 years. So that means good job security, right? But that's a big problem, a very big problem. And on the other side, we have a group of individuals who are not given the dignity they deserve in the collection of the plastic. So we're looking at the waste pickers and the social impact. And so for us, how we close the loop was we are going to work with the people that are doing the hard work, bring a fair trade principle to waste management, which is not really there, especially in the global south. And then on top of that, the reward is we are cleaning up the environment and solving and addressing the plastic pollution problem. And so when you look at it, I would say the circular economy, there are 5 R's, they say. So there is the reuse, reduce, recycle, there's now refurbish and repair. But I like to say, I'd like to introduce the 6th word, which is a Swahili word of rudia. And rudia means repeat. And why I say this is because the African continent, the birthplace of civilization and all of that is also where circular economy concept has always been there. And I always point to this example. If you go to the village, you'll see the grandmas will always reuse everything from a maize cob to any plastic that they have. But on top of that, the whole idea of working for the benefit of the community is at the core of the African context. So I believe circular economy, the birthplace is Africa. And I also believe this is also the opportunity for Africa now to also show through business practices, to policy as well, that we are going to obviously solve this problem, right? We tend to be known as the dumping ground, but a lot of the solutions we have are being built by Kenyans, for Kenyans, and obviously for Africa and by Africans as well. So I think that's a quick
introduction. Thank you, Sonia. Wow. We come now to you, Edward.
Good. Thanks so much, Dr. Mombe. Yes. My name's Edward Isingoma. As my colleague just mentioned, we are all here for a purpose of solving things more practically. I lead the team at Pearl Capital Partners, and as PCP, we are an agri-focused fund management business. We've been at this for 2 decades now, And as she also mentioned, we were the first Ugandan-based B Corp organization in East Africa, and we proudly associate with being sustainable, knowing agriculture is not just a doer practically in Africa, but also the major impact sector for the environment, and working with the private sector and SMEs that we invest in. It's been a tough journey to educate, change culture, change perceptions, change the way our Africans look at nature and environment and sustainable investing and practices. And I think I always tell many people I get to meet that even we Africans learn differently. It's not the PowerPoints that will change how we do things. It's more practical on how we do things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Edward. Over to you, Amandine.
Thank you. So Amandine, it's basically the French version of Amanda. It's also a cake in France. Thank you so much, firstly, to have me here. I've been part of a B-Lab Africa network for about 3 years now, but it's only been on Zoom. So I'm really happy to be meeting you in person. So I work for a business association. So we represent the private sector across all sectors of Mauritius. We represent about 1,500 companies, SMEs to large ones. And we, as an organization, are organized in 3 departments, which we call commissions. And one is about economic development, we're the private sector after all. One is about social integration, and the third one in sustainable development. And I'm the head of a sustainable development department. And my job, therefore, is twofold: to engage with my members and help them implement sustainable development practices and projects. And by doing that, I also get to hear about the challenges that they face in implementing these projects. And so then we go to the government and we talk to them about the challenges that the private sector faces, and we make recommendations on policy making and policy implementation that could help us and our members implement sustainable development strategies. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Amandine. Over to you, Joachim, please.
Testing, yeah, working. Morning, everyone. My name is Joachim Westerveld, and I'm aging because I can't read. This display is really confronting me with my age because I can't read it. So I thank you for that. I'm going to see a notation. Very happy to be here, first of all. I think back in 2004, my business partner and I, Jaco, we started our first company, and we set out with the objectives that we wanted to do business for good. And for us, that meant that we wanted to do business which would put people, planet, and profit at the same level. And today in Kenya, I'm very happy that we've actually put our talk into walk. I'm the chairman of Greenspoon. My colleagues are there. Who knows Greenspoon? Who's a customer? You're allowed to say. The rest you can just wait outside. No, I'm joking. Greenspoon is the most sustainable online grocery platform in Kenya. We try to source locally. We try to source organically. We try to source sustainably. And we bring premium products to your door. You order in the morning, you have it in the afternoon. And we do so mostly using electric vehicles. So we're really trying to be as sustainable as possible. And it's a journey, but we're progressing. And I think that was crowned, I think it was last year. I think we can proudly say that we're the only, we're the only B Corp certified food or even delivery platform in Kenya. And my colleagues are there, so you can talk to them later. Secondly, I'm the CEO of Highlands. Highlands Drinks, which is a beverage company. It's a little bit less sustainable, but we are trying. As an example, we have moved to solar. We were already 5 years ago far ahead of anybody else. We were voluntary members of PETCO, meaning that we're paying for every gram of plastic we put out in the environment. We're moving to livable wage, which I can elaborate on a little bit later. And lastly, I'm the CEO of Biofood Products. Who knows Biofood Products? Who consumes our products? Who likes our products? I love you. We are the only dairy company in Kenya that makes dairy products on the most stringent global quality standards. That means we have zero tolerance for antibiotics. We're toxin safe. There's a lot of aflatoxin in dairy in Kenya, and we can only do that by working very closely together with our farmers. And we are very proud. I think we're the first food manufacturer in Kenya and the third or fourth dairy in Africa and the 73rd dairy in the world that has become B Corp certified. So we're very proud of that because you can applaud. It's allowed. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Very excited to be here. There was something just before I hand over the mic. There was something that really struck me in the presentation of the ambassador. Costa Rica, small country. I come from a small country, the Netherlands. Necessity is the master of invention. If you're small, you need to be smart. If you're put in a situation which is difficult, you need to change. You need to be innovative. And I think the optimism that I have after this climate summit and after where Kenya is, we're not in a good situation, but necessity is the master of invention. And I think where we are today, you can see this government needs to innovate. This government needs to change, because if they don't, we will default and a lot of bad things will happen. But in adversity is opportunity, right? I think, and I had the message that I would like to give you today, in that adversity is the biggest opportunity. And you said it, Madam Ambassador, we see this government, they need to change, they are changing. And I think it is up to us, for those who here are representing the private sector, but also those who are representing the NGOs, this is the time to join hands and to say, how can we make sure that this government that needs to change is going to make the right changes that are going to give real results? Because we have so much opportunity. You said it about hydropower. You said it about the green hydrogen. Whether we talk about agriculture, making our agriculture sufficient, making sure that we can feed our nation sustainably, which we can't at the moment in a country like Kenya. The time is now. So I'm actually very optimistic and very happy to be here today to exchange ideas of how we can make that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joachim. Last but not least, Anton, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Joachim. So thank you to all of you. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, the BILAB team for having us here. And a big shout to my team in the corner over there. So since it's bragging rights, I will say that we were a B Corp before there was a B Corp movement in Kenya. So we're... We have won multiple awards for best in the world B Corp. So that's equal to Solibrium. Another thing we are proud of is that we are based in the rural areas of Kenya. We don't work in the city. We go where the demand is highest. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what we do. So we work in nature conservation and natural resource conservation. We've been working, Madam Ambassador, in the payment for ecosystem services and carbon credit market for over 10 years, since 2010. We were founded, myself and my colleagues, we founded the company in 2009, and we've run multiple successful projects. We work a lot with small farmers on sustainability, on agroforestry. We work in energy efficiency. We've tried to work in solar. That's a different story altogether. But our focus has always been to create jobs, to pump as much money into the rural Kenyan economy as possible, and to get the communities that we live in to buy into the whole idea of sustainable development. To add to what you said, we are driven by our passion for people, the planet, and of course, profit. We're a private company, but we also add another P, which is purpose. And we are focused on climate change mitigation. We are focused on emission reductions, and we are focused on conservation in a very big way. We believe that we are currently suffering from a tunnel vision on carbon in climate change, but the impact of climate change on biodiversity, on rural livelihoods, on people is massive. And the loss of biodiversity in the world might actually be a far bigger tragedy than change in global temperatures. So I think we are not looking at the problem with a completely open mind. But yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I'm glad to meet everybody. Very interesting presentation from the ambassador to Costa Rica. Amazing country. I'm a tropical forest biologist by training, and I have 3 places I want to go that I haven't been. I've been to most of the world, but I want to go to Papua New Guinea. I want to go to the Amazon, of course, and I want to see Costa Rica as a model of a country that's grown internationally to be known for its sustainability. And I think that's something we can do in Kenya. We cannot emulate what Costa Rica does. I mean, they have a geographic gift that we don't have. But we can grow, we can have champions of sustainability in different sectors in Kenya, such as what you're doing in agriculture, or regionals. We can work with counties, and each county has a strength. So there is ways that we can develop similar systems in Kenya that would be applicable to our setting as a country where we are right now. So thank you again, and I'm looking forward to the panel.
Thank you so much, Anton. And I'd like to kick it off with the whole discussion around carbon markets. So also in the summit, this has been discussed at length from different perspectives. So I'll come to you, Amandine, and it's good to know the meaning of your name. So you're coming from Mauritius, and what, can you share with us regarding those strategies and incentives that can be put in place to encourage businesses to participate in these markets?
Thank you. So as I'll be giving my answer from a Mauritian perspective, it's maybe useful for this audience to have a bit of a context. Mauritius is tiny dot in the middle of the Indian Ocean. You drive 70 kilometers from south to north and 40 kilometers from east to west. And we are 1.2 million people. So I think essentially all of Mauritius can fit in Nairobi. Okay. A couple of years ago, our government announced some lofty ambitions, lofty compared to where we are now, to reduce our emissions by 40% by 2030, and to increase our share of renewable energy from about 19% now to 60% in 2030. So we don't have a lot of time to achieve all of that. At the same time, in the past 5 years, we've seen a real engagement from the private sector towards sustainable development practices. And there's a real understanding now that there is no other way to develop Mauritius than sustainably. So there is a convergence and alignment in ambitions and goals from government side and private sector side. And that's already very positive for us. What's less positive is, we're also a biodiversity hotspot in the Mascarini Islands. We have a lot of unique biodiversity, terrestrial and marine. But unfortunately, unlike Costa Rica, we haven't taken care of it very well. We've had more than 80% of deforestation, and the forests that we do have left are not in very good health because of invasive species. And our oceans, we have a very vast territory in the oceans because we have multiple outer islands, so they form part of our EEZ. And we don't know what's in our oceans. We have very little scientific study. We don't know how many seagrasses are there. We don't know how many mangroves are there. So we don't know the capacity of our blue carbon. So with all of that being set up, over the past year that I've been in Business Mauritius, I've had more and more companies come to me and ask me about carbon markets and how could they benefit from carbon market, or how could they either buy from it or sell on it. And because we're on the voluntary market, we don't belong to the compliance market. The voluntary market is complex to understand, and it's a bit of a Wild West. And the value chain is hard to understand. Who are the regulators? Who are the certifiers? Who are the traders? And the price of carbon is fairly low on the voluntary carbon markets. And in Mauritius, we have a problem of scale. So our forests, we have some national parks, but we also have a lot of forests that are privately owned. And alone, these patches of forest are not enough to be able to sell on the carbon credit. So we would have to have all the players work together, rehabilitate the forest in order for them to be able to be on the voluntary carbon markets. We have the same problem in the energy sector. We have solar panels, or we have an increase of solar panels at least, but we only have 1 or 2 farms which have been large enough to benefit from the carbon markets. The rest is too small. So we would have, again, to have all players work together. So we have a lot of challenges. It's complex to understand the carbon markets. We have a problem of scale. And we also have a problem of capacity and resources in the sustainability space. We only now in the last few years have companies that are doing full scopes carbon footprints. And they need international consultants to come and do that, and that's expensive. And there's more and more companies are setting up their sustainability departments, but they're new, they're small. A lot of them are junior officers because thankfully the newer generation have done a lot more studies in sustainable development, but we don't have a lot of senior experts in it. So again, it takes a lot of money. So what we've done at Business Mauritius recently is we've created, this is very recent, we've created a working group where we invited about 15 members to come and discuss the issue of carbon accounting and carbon markets. And we've tried to have representations from the renewable energy sector. We have 2 on the biodiversity sector. One is a tropical forest expert, and the other is an ocean expert. So we have the 2. We have some representations from the manufacturing and tourism, of course. And these companies are interested because in the tourism sector, it's becoming extremely important to be green. With the whole, again, tiny island in the middle of the ocean, our main market is from Europe. They have to take very long flights to get to us, which means that it's not a very green thing to do. And so the tourists are asking our hotels more and more about what do you do to offset your carbons? Is there a project that I can put some money in? So they have a lot of imperative to do that. In the manufacturing sector, we have a textile industry, and there's a lot of pressure from foreign investors and brands to make the industry greener. So the companies and the private sector is aware that there's an imperative for them to change. They want to change, but it's a complex system. So our idea in the working group now is to invite some experts to teach us and better understand the carbon market. And what we hope to achieve is to create toolkits that demystify and decomplexify this for the private sector, so that then we can have some capacity building elements to it. And then from these learnings, we can also then go to our government and say, please help us. Because right now, there is no mandatory sustainability reporting in Mauritius. There's no ESG framework. There's no carbon market. So we want to then open this discussion with government to tell us what we need in order for this to work.
Wow, so well put. I think there are tensions, and I like the idea of the working group. I think I'm seeing a lot of that in our own market in South Africa around the same issues. But let me come to you, Edward, again, because you have a lot of experience in getting businesses ready for impact investing. And you mentioned in your starting, the way you introduced yourself about the mindset. So, there are a lot of success stories out here. I mean, you guys are also success stories because there are B Corps here, but we know it's not always so rosy. So what do you think, or rather, what has been your experience in, I guess, just local businesses and how they view sustainability, how they integrate this in their strategy at a local level? What are some of your experiences so far?
Yeah, thanks so much, Doc. I must say, I'll try and keep this as brief as I can, because I could speak a whole day about this topic, but I'll keep it to very basics. We as a PE venture capital house investing in these agri SMEs, when you speak to the entrepreneurs, and 80% of agriculture SMEs are family-owned businesses. When you speak to them, it comes down to the little dynamics of small things around what generationally these families have had to do, whether they're in dairy, whether they're in honey, whether they're in poultry. It comes down to some of the basics that they've done from the way they understand sustainability and climate change and impact at their level. Now, when we come in and make investments in these SMEs and then start telling them the complicated terminologies, today, there's a lot of terminologies that I can tell you, even myself, I'm going through a learning curve. Recently, I sent something around to my team at PCP, and I said, look how much terminologies are there about carbon emissions. The dictionary is being reinvented. And if that's the case, and we are going out there and talking about being climate smart, being B Corp certified, and we are telling all these SMEs about how we think they should be sustainable. I feel there's a lot that we are trying to push to these SMEs. They probably are not ready yet, and we will expect them to be running before they walk. And I feel that's where personally I have a challenge, that they have a lot to chew up in their challenges. And we've got to get to be patient with them as we walk the journey with them on sustainability, as we walk the journey with them on them being and worrying about the accountant in me, their P&L, before they start worrying about how much damage the polythene bag is doing on the environment. And I feel like, yes, there's a lot there to be done. Now, when it comes to the rural ones, some of my colleagues are telling me they're working with the rural farmers, smallholder farmers in the rural setting. And you go out there and say, how many of them are going to worry about whether they are using polythene or a paper bag? Or how many of them are going to go to a shop and say, it's okay, leave the polythene. I can carry this milk can or this bottle home and for the benefit of the environment. Are we there yet in terms of our culture dynamics, in terms of our settings? And when I listened to the ambassador talking here, in my head, it kept going and saying, look, my beautiful country, Uganda, my valleys, do these guys down there appreciate this the way we should? And I think there's a lot of talk and less of action. And that's the way I would sum it up. And even when some of these SMEs get involved, they're getting involved either because we, the investors, the private equity players, are forcing them to. Maybe some of them are even startups. They've not had their 3rd anniversary of their birth. And then we are telling them, no, you need to think about this. It's about climate change. It's about, is that where we are going to get to? And then we're saying, okay, there's so much capital out there chasing climate interventions. Yes. And they're trying to tick the boxes to get into that bracket, but is it real? So those are some of the things that I would think about.
Yeah, well put, Edward. And I think it also came out because there was a lot of discussion around climate finance. Is it accessible? Is it affordable? Is it at scale? And I think now I'll come to you, Joachim, because how this balance between now the impact, the profitability, tell us a little bit about that, just from, the reality on the ground, as we like to say here.
Well, I'm happy you gave me the mic, otherwise I would have taken it, because I think, and I was struck by it in the last couple of days, attending some conferences or some breakfasts with CEOs. I think we have a wrong perspective. We look at sustainability as something that you need to do, that you need to tick. I believe sustainability is the only way to create long-term value. It's very simple. It's very simple. And I'm not saying that because I believe it. I'm saying it because I see it. I can see it. My colleagues of Bio are here, Rosa and Waithera. Since we have put sustainability at the core of everything we do, what happened to our company? We're growing. We are growing, and I'm very proud to say we're in this market, we're growing by 25% in volume. And I won't disclose value because you can imagine that value with inflation is much higher. Now, in a market and an economy that is where we are, and you can grow by 25%, that's because we have brought sustainability to the core. That means we put people first. If you have the people, you have the business, right? If you show people that, also from a perspective of efficiency, I believe that sustainability is a great tool to become more efficient, because it's all about how can I get the most output with the least resources, and that's what running a business is about. So I think and I hear people then say, oh, we need to sign and we just show what we do and there's always something we're doing. That is like a bolt-on. It's like, okay, I have a car and I put a sticker on it and, I drive a little bit slow, but it is the core of value creation. And I think the further our climate crisis will go, the further our population will grow, the further our agriculture needs to become more sustainable and more efficient, the more sustainability has to be core of your business, because without it, I can give you an example. Farmers. If I have a farmer who produces 5 liters of milk from a cow, right? Not sustainable, because you can't feed 52 million Kenyans with 5 or 3 liter cows. Just do the math, how much milk we drink and how much cows we need. Impossible. So we need to help that farmer to become more efficient, to make sure that from that cow they get more milk. And where does that start? That starts with making sure that fodder is grown in a more sustainable, more efficient way. Not happening today. But if we don't, right, in 5 years, 10 years time, we won't have a business. It's very simple. So I think that we need to, and I think even the way we speak about sustainability, we need to start changing it. Sustainability is not something that you tick. Sustainability for people, planet, and profit is what you bring to the core. And I have personally observed in our business, and I'm very proud of it, that we invest, we do things, for instance, Petco, the plastic investment, we started 6 years ago. Nobody told us to do it. We do it because we believe it's right. It makes a big difference because your people also see that you do things right, and then they start changing their behavior. It creates a lot of value. And I would recommend everybody, don't do it as a bolt-on, do it, bring it to the core of your business, and really, and they might see, for instance, I'll give you another example. Who knows what the minimum manufacturing wage is in Nairobi? Who can tell me? If nobody raises their hands, I'm going to appoint a volunteer. Be careful. 20,000, a little bit up. It's 23. Who believes that you can live in Nairobi, have a house, feed your family, have healthcare, send your kids to school, and have a bit of money for a rainy day on 23,000 shillings? No hands, right? We don't believe that. So we at Bio said, how can we have our people come to work, pay the minimum wage, and we know simply that they can't get by? How can we ask them to give their best, to give their all to our company if we don't give them what they need in order to have a decent life? So we moved with Bio to livable wage. Who knows what livable wage is in Nairobi? Make a guess. A little bit down. It's 34.4, I think. Rosa? There you go. She's the champ. Let's give our champ an applause. She's actually the driver of our sustainability. And we implemented that. So at Bio, you will not find anybody that's below that. And rest assured, that's costs a lot of money. But we don't look at it as cost. We see it as an investment. First of all, we see it as the right thing to do. So there's no discussion whether you should do it, because it simply doesn't make sense not to. Number two, what we see is that the momentum we have in our business, because people feel I've been taken care of, right? Mm-hmm. This business does what's right for me and they want the best for me, then I want the best for my business. It pays off in a multitude of ways. So I think, long story short, we need to change our narrative. Sustainability for people and planet is not something that we bolt on. It's not something that we can tick. It is, if you bring it to the core of your business, it will create value now and in the long term. And it will make sure that you have a business in the long term. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Good.
More than enough.
I can go on. Be careful.
I think what I'm hearing is the importance of leadership, and governance as well of business. And that brings me now to you, Sonia. you have, a lot of experience in circularity. What are the practical steps you think businesses can be taking to embrace circular economy principles here and across Africa?
Okay, great. I think one word I'd say is, responsibility. At the end, when you look at the just transition, you look at circular economy, it's about people being responsible for what they put out into the environment and making sure it can come back and possibly be reused and closing that loop, right? And so I think it starts with also the design of your product. So if I start with the company on one side, is if you're designing a product, design a product that is not going to end up in a landfill, for example, or that can be recycled, reused, reduced, and all of that. But more importantly, and I always say, is it is the consumer that has the greatest power and has the highest responsibility. Because just maybe to go with what Joachim said, if we switch to responsible brands, okay, you're pushing the agenda that we are only going to buy from biofoods as opposed to the competitor, because biofoods is more responsible, right? And they're looking at making sure that they are not going, their product doesn't end up in the landfill. They're paying their EPR fees, which is making sure it can be recycled. It's making sure the waste picker at the bottom of the value chain is getting a fair wage for what he's doing. So I would say the word responsibility, and I'd also like to add to what Joachim said, is at Mr. Green, we don't believe in CSR. In fact, that term for me, it means you're doing what you're doing, and then I have a body here that's going to help me sanitize the rest of what I'm doing, right? And at Mr. Green, it's about, it has to be part and parcel of what you do. And I always tell young entrepreneurs is that you have to be solving a problem. In this day and age, to have a sustainable business, you have to be solving a problem, right? And so if you're going to solve that problem, naturally, it's going to be sustainable if you do that, okay? And so maybe just for some advice for businesses is demystify this whole circular economy. Make it very practical. Sonia, I am going to create this bottle, okay? When I am designing the bottle, I need to make sure it can live 7 times before it degrades, correct? Because at the moment, for example, if it's plastic, that's as much as it can. But there's also technologies that are showing that you could create it with other materials that can make it continue to have a new life, okay? So once I've done that, great. Put it out into the market, okay? Brand it accordingly and make the noise that it is possible, because you'd be shocked that a lot of us in manufacturing and in green manufacturing know the technologies that are out there. They're extremely expensive, and that's a barrier to entry, okay? But with policy support of EPR fees and making sure there's financing going into redesigning products and all of that, then it becomes, there can be more Mr. Greens. Mr. Blue, Mrs. Pink can also show up and do something also, right? I think that is really important. And I believe if everybody takes responsibility, me as Sonia, not as the CEO of Mr. Green, if when I go shopping today, I look for the product that has been designed for the circular economy, that will close the loop. And from there will be a big push, guys. We've all seen it, the big brands, the big top 10 polluters, we know them, are all pushing the agenda of that we must have recyclability, we must have this, we must have that. But if the demand doesn't come from the consumer, they're going to easily switch back. We're seeing in Europe, right? A lot of the companies that said we must have 60% of our product having 60% of recycled content, now that the virgin prices have dropped, are switching, right? And this is when the consumer voice becomes important. And so I would say, consumers, we have a lot to do. Companies on our end, we also have a lot to do in listening to the consumer, when the consumer becomes woke, of course. And from there on, then the circularity becomes natural. Then you're not talking about circular economy, you're talking about CSR. You're not even using the word sustainability. This is just how we have to do business.
Thank you. And now I can now come to Anton, because you've mentioned financing. Again, this is an overarching discussion we've been having. So from your perspective, Anton, the role of financial institutions in advancing green growth, green economy, green business, promoting sustainable finance initiatives, what role do they play, and where do you see the opportunities and the gaps in Africa?
Okay, let me go back a couple of steps, right? So why did we get into the carbon market in the first place? Because there is no financial institution that 13 years ago would finance conservation. Sustainability, the lack of it or its existence, it's still an economic choice. I have to agree with Edward more than I would agree with Joachim, because, sorry, Joachim, the choices that our rural partners make in terms of their purchases, in terms of how they grow their crops, are based purely on economics. They're not based on a negative perception or a positive perception of the environment. When a woman goes to buy tomatoes in the market in Kakamega, I think most of you know where Kakamega is. It's up here. She does not think, was this grown with pesticides, organic fertilizers? She looks at the price and she looks at whether it's hard or soft, blemishes. That's all she's interested in. Sustainability, conservation remains an economic choice. And as long as we price economic development higher than we price sustainability, we are facing an uphill battle in having sustainable businesses. Let's be honest, most of us, if none of us, drove here in electric vehicles. We didn't walk here, we didn't come by bicycle. My footprint as a CEO of a company that promotes sustainability, my carbon footprint is still higher than that of a woman living in Kakamega who has no interest in sustainability. So sustainability and its financing and everything, there's still economic problems. What Costa Rica did with a carbon tax was create an economic incentive that would finance sustainability. And that's what carbon markets do. And that's what they did years ago before financial institutions became interested in sustainability. Carbon markets are imperfect. They're not good. They're imperfect in very many ways. But there is very few ways of transferring wealth from the polluting north or west or whatever you want to call it to the developing south. And while carbon markets are a system that we have now, financial institutions can step in to try and give a value to sustainability higher than it is right now. But without the participation of governments, without a tax for pollution, for example, what's happening with plastics globally, it's strange that we still don't have laws banning the use of plastics. It's strange that you get on an aeroplane flying from here to Holland. Oh, KLM now has bamboo forks and spoons on the plane. But it's strange that not everybody has it. It's really surprising that people know how much damage plastic does, and governments have not done anything about it. So that's the situation we face. And financial institutions are prisoners to the financial system. They need to make money. They need to serve their investors. They need to have a bottom line. They cannot operate outside a viable financial model unless they're funded by grants. But grants in themselves are charitable donations from a Western system that has become overtly wealthy on an exploitative model. The model of extraction, suck out, sent to the West for manufacture, and then sent back to sell in Africa, is an inherently exploitative model. It's not evil. I'm not talking about what's wrong or right. I'm talking about how the systems work. I'm talking about how we operate. Sad to say, but I think the Kenyan coffee sold in Starbucks in the US is tastier than the Kenyan coffee sold in Kenya. And that's because we have not learned to generate value within our own systems. And that's the value that financial institutions can tap. That being said, the global movement for ESG right now, to back what Sonia said, the evolution from CSR, where you do something bad and then you turn around and do something good to compensate for that. The global movement in ESG, particularly in big industries, might be one of the things that might transform the system, where we no longer require carbon finance, but we can go up to institutions like Edwards financial people and say, look, we have a sustainability model that perhaps is high risk, but, taking what Joachim said, on the long term, 5 or 6 years, it might be able to generate some revenue. So yeah, I think we need a wholesale change, but it has to be led by governments that can put policies in place that will support businesses. And we don't have that at the moment.
Thank you, Anton. I think now I'll come to actually the ambassador. I'll hand you the microphone. it was very inspiring to your presentation. And one of the things I think now moving from the local level, now going national, global, what are some of the lessons that African countries can learn when it comes to preparing their proposals for adaptation projects, mitigation, resilience? What are some of the tools that you think would be useful for us, learning from your experience?
Thank you very much. Well, let's see. I will be brief on that point because frankly, I would also like to kind of touch on some of the main points that have been brought up by all the panelists. So experience, you know, I think for most developing countries, when back in 2011, when we started pushing for adaptation resources and mitigation resources, it ended up being mitigation was what pushed everything, which is what we did. And because we were the first ones there, we got resources to do a lot of things. But at the end, I think it wasn't as beneficial as it was for other developing countries who actually went for adaptation plans before they did mitigation. So, well, it is what it is. And we have our national adaptation plan and a national, how would we call it? It's like a mapping of all the risk areas, highest risk areas of the country, which at the same time then helped us to say, this is what we need to do with adaptation in the most vulnerable regions of the country. So I really don't know what else to say about tools in terms of adaptation and mitigation, but I do want to touch on these things, on the different things. And so in terms of Sonia and plastics, I think this, because we're negotiating this right now and it touches with your business and your business and your business and your business, and it's plastics. And you couldn't believe, you know, it's just so complex. You know, we're just now looking at the 3,000 different polymers, which ones are really the worst and the most, you know, contaminating ones for human health, for the environment. And then you have the plastics industry, which of course it's a no-go, and it's consumers, it's your responsibility. And then you have, of course, consumers saying, no, it's you producers' responsibility. So it's a nightmare. Frankly, it is. And I don't know how we're going to come out of it, but we have to. I mean, it's the only solution. And as you very clearly said at the beginning of your intervention, you have enough single-use plastic right now, even if the whole world's plastic production was stopped, to have enough business, at least for that part. But we get into the problem of the recycling. And as we've all said, economy and circular economy, that's a buzzword. Everybody talks about it. But at the same time, I feel it's kind of tricky. And it's also related to what you were both talking about, financing and checking the boxes and what is really impactful and what is greenwashing. I mean, there's a whole very nebulous area out there, you know, and a lot of the things that you all touched upon, and Joachim, you about the sustainability is at the core of businesses, I couldn't agree more with you. There's also the issue, though, when you talked about the farmers, if they're going to go buy a product, they don't care, the lady in Kakamega, whether it's, you know, organic tomato or not. But there is something very important related to what you're doing as well. It has to do, and you with the agricultural sector, and you with Mauritius, is the labeling. It's information, it's consumer information. So when you say it's the consumers, yes, if they have the right information. You know, when you see that, I hate it now. The green little 2 arrows that go like that, that doesn't mean your product is 100% recyclable. So that's one of the things that we said in Costa Rica. We have to start educating everybody. We don't really know what are those global science standards that you can trust when you see a product. So that's part of the whole discussion that we're doing right now in the plastics negotiations. And of course, it has to do with ensuring that the food sector has the right products so that you have the sanitary measures or standards for the customers. But anyway, so that's kind of an ongoing discussion. And then I wanted to finally touch on the whole thing about carbon credits. And you know, in Costa Rica, like we said, we set that tax on it. So we're kind of behind in the curve of accessing carbon credits because we created our own market. And that's one of the things I'm trying to see if we can have like a international cooperation project, Costa Rica, Kenya, whereby we learn from the Kenyans what they have done with carbon credits, because you're like 10 years ahead because of the NGOs and what they have done so far, particularly in the mangrove restoration area on the coastlines, from Lamu all the way down to the border with Tanzania. And we can teach Kenyans on what we have done on conservation in terms of methodologies and how do you measure and monitor the marine species, which we'll have to talk about that. You being a biologist, that's very important. But again, what the two of you also mentioned in terms of the carbon credit markets, it is still so unclear. I find the rules are very difficult sometimes to understand and to play by. And as you said, there's the voluntary market and there's the commitments. So I work for the government. So of course, you know, we have committed to certain reductions of emissions. So we are caught now in a situation where if we sell our CO2 emissions capture to get money from companies that cannot truly reduce their emissions for whatever reason, that means I cannot do what is called double accounting. I can't tell you X company, yes, give me the money for, I don't know, 1,000 CO2 tons of carbon that I've sequestered. So that's, you know, still an area that I think needs to be really worked out. I think it can cause confusion. So I don't know, that's just my experience. And also we're trying to find a way that indeed we use our CO2 sequestration for our commitments. And if there's a little bit left, maybe 5%, we can consider trading in the market. But as some of you said, and I said in my presentation, back then when we started, it was $5 a ton of CO2. That is really nothing. But when I say this to Europeans, maybe you have more information, but the ETS, which is the European trading system, they say, no, it's 70 euros a ton. And I'm like, okay, but you know, how do you get in there? Anyway, that I think we could have a full day conversation only on carbon credits and carbon markets, but I hope I've kind of touched a little bit on everybody's interventions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think as we are getting to the end of the panel, I'll just invite maybe one or two questions and then we can address them as we give our closing remarks. Does anybody have a question, a burning one? Or you guys are sorted? Okay, let me come to you.
Okay, hi everyone. Oh, you sound so down. How are you? Okay, great. Anyway, my name is Caroline Wanene. I'm a researcher and I build capacity in terms of climate change. A Kenyan, working on my PhD in some of the similar areas. I want to know just from first of all, thank you for your talk. I want to know from any one of you, one of the issues that we've been discussing in the summit is the issue of ownership. I hope you can all hear me.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, the issue of ownership. We are realizing that the communities do not own the climate change dialogue for whatever reason. They're not able to understand it. They're not able to own it. They're not able to conceptualize it, etc., etc. From any one of you, I would like to know to what extent and what are your efforts in terms of bringing the community closer to the climate change solutions. And I went to some of your websites and I think they're good, but I'm not seeing that component. And there are small things that we can do, like, for example, translating your website into Swahili or the vernacular languages, etc. So I want to know from any one of you, to what extent are you utilizing your skills, experience, etc., your organizations, companies, with regards to bringing the community closer to owning the climate change solutions, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. So I think we'll start with Anton coming here as we close off and give our remarks, but also addressing her question. No.
Are you taking?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you for that. That's good question, and I'll take you back 14 years now. When we were starting a reforestation carbon project in Kakamega in 2008, 2009, there was no regulation in Kenya about carbon credit ownership. And we pioneered a discussion with the Kenya Forest Service where 40% of all carbon credit revenue would go to the community. The other 40% would go to the government, and then 20% would be shared between ourselves and investors. The point of this is that the communities we work with, at least, but generally I think communities all over, even in the cities, are right at the forefront of climate change. They're paying the price for the lack of conservation. People that are affluent have much more flexibility in choices, much more flexibility in responses. People in the rural areas, if the rains fail, they don't harvest their maize that July. You know, people don't have mgorogoro nyumbani and ugali hakuna. So things become difficult for people in a very direct way. So how to involve the community? If you can monetize, you know, the system, like for example, through carbon credits, then carbon credit revenue should, you know, a significant portion of it should go down to the community, to the people participating, to the people generating the credits. I know the carbon market is complex. It's actually not that complex. It's just, yeah, it's a bit messy. But the person who generates the credit is the person who is involved either in the energy efficiency, in planting the tree, etc. That person is the ultimate owner of the carbon credit, and that person should receive at least a fair compensation for that. The other thing is, you pointed out correctly, our website is not translated into Swahili or Kiluya, Pole sana, but we should do that. Our website is several years old, but information is key as well. And the community should understand what is going on, why climate change mitigations are happening. And we work very closely with the community. All my colleagues are from Kakamega. I am from Kakamega. I grew up in Kakamega. I went to school in Kakamega. My dad still lives in Kakamega. So every single one of my colleagues here, all my assistant directors, everybody, we are almost all from Kakamega. We have people from all over Kenya, but you know, John, Emily worked in the same forest that we are working to conserve. They are now part of the team. They're part of the leadership of ECO2. They're shareholders in the company. We are working with the community in a way that very few other entities work. It's not always practical and it's not always sustainable, but it is doable.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beautiful forest, by the way. I've been there many times. If you've never been to Kakamega Forest, go. It's the last remainder of equatorial rainforest in Kenya. It's small, but it's magical. I think, and you said it, Anton, I actually agree with you what you said prior, and I think it's also an answer to your question. Ultimately, it's an economic choice, right? People have to make an economic choice. And I think it's hard for people to own the narrative if it doesn't make sense to them, right? Because until they feel the impact on their lives, which is the climate change is a very vague. You can point it out, but as long as I get my maize and I get my tomatoes or whatever. So I think and again, Anton, I agree with you there. I think what is important, the market, us as consumers have impact on what manufacturers and what the market provides. I think government has a very important role to play to put a cost on the wrong behavior. And I can give you an example. 2 years ago, we tried to import rPET, recycled PET. There was not even regulation in place. So when we started asking around, so rPET basically means bottle-to-bottle recycled plastic because we use plastic. There was not even regulation in place for us to import it. There was no standard. People say, oh, we don't know if you can use it. We don't know if you're allowed to use it. I'll give you another example. If I go to the UK today and I walk into a showroom and I buy an electric vehicle, it will cost me $25,000. If I get that same vehicle in Kenya today, I pay $54,000. So what do most people do? They go for a third-hand Japanese guzzler, right? Because it's cheaper, right? So I think what is important is that the consumer has a voice, and we need to have policies in place that put a cost on the wrong behavior and a premium on the right behavior. Because then what we see, for instance, with our farmers, we pay our farmers a higher price. We do a lot about productivity. We try to help them to become more efficient. And then they start owning that narrative because it becomes interesting for them. They talk about regenerative farming. They say, how can we do this? Because it's the right thing to do, because they actually see that it's economically, it will create value for them. And I think that's where we have an issue in engaging communities, because they'll say, well, you know, as long as I'm hustling for my daily bread, as long as that in that hustle, this has no impact on me, why would I worry about it? And I think policy, so the consumer has a big impact, and I totally agree with you. Labeling, educating consumers. Why? I'll give you an example as well. We live in the idea that a liter of milk should cost 100 shillings, isn't it, in Kenya? It's not true. You cannot have profitable farmers that do the right thing at 100 shillings. Still, the majority of Kenyans, we think milk should be 100 shillings. As long as we don't correct the market perception of what you need to do in order to have a thriving dairy sector and a more sustainable dairy sector, you're going to be in the same circle. And that's where the government has a big role to play. Does that answer a little bit your question? Yeah? A little bit. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll try my best next time.
Amandine?
Thank you. So I'll tackle the question in two ways. The first one, I find it fascinating, this issue of awareness and whether awareness or not leads to a change in behavior or not. There's a lot of psychological research around that, of whether knowing something makes you change your habits. And it's not as direct a line from knowing to doing as we hope it is. And a little anecdote is, in Mauritius, we're now working on a new regulation to do segregation of waste at source. And in 2 years' time, it should become a reality. And before we do that, we need to do a lot of awareness, because we have a culture in Mauritius that is not wonderful when it comes to waste management. And so we looked to our sister island, Réunion Island, which is a French island. So they've been doing segregation at source for a very long time. And so I asked somebody from there, you know, how did you do it at the beginning to get everybody on board? And the answer was, well, you know, Amandine, we've been doing this for 10 years. And every time we stop any of the campaigns, we see the behavior going down again. So it's actually a continuous work, and it's nonstop. That's my first lesson so far from this. Then for us at Business Mauritius, the way we work is around working groups or committees. And we have around 8 to 15 people on each committee on different themes, so biodiversity, circular economy, and so on. And we try to have, obviously we have to serve our members, but we try to have some diversity in these committees, in that we invite at least one spot for a university and one spot for a member of civic society. So that's how we try and include them and have them then spread the word to their communities. And we have a working group with NGOs as well. So the idea is that they will then take the information out there. And we do conferences throughout the year on these different topics where we invite everybody. And the idea is to democratize the information. But again, people who come are generally people who are already interested in the topic. But thankfully, there are people from the civic society, from the NGO that come, and again, they can spread that word. And we're working on our website. But communication is hard. It's a whole job. And I am not a communication expert. And it takes a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of thinking, and I'm learning to do it. But to do that alongside my other job, which is more about sustainability, to be honest, I find it quite hard. So I'm learning to do it better and more. But it's also a learning curve for me.
Thank you, Amandine, for being so candid. It's true, it is challenging. Edward?
Yeah, thank you. I tend to agree with everybody else, but one thing I would be very keen to mention, there are 3 things I would love to mention about this question. One is communication and awareness out there. I agree, it's a whole different sector, it's a whole different thing, but one thing I would be very keen to do and say here and now is that I don't think it's going to be effective for the masses, for the smallholder farmers, for the people we work with, and the ultimate people in rural areas if it's going to be done, for example, through websites. If it's going to be done through PowerPoint presentations, if it's going to be done, we are here talking about this. I don't think our rural smallholder farmers give a damn about what we are talking about. So I think we need to be practical and real. That's my starting point. So that's point one. Point number two, I think awareness in the African setting is not going to be the same awareness in Joachim's setting in Netherlands. No way. Let's stop bullshitting about that. It's not. It's about my neighbor. What has my neighbor done? These smallholder farmers are communities. What's the culture? How are we behaving? How have we been set up? And if we are going to come and call everybody to come and tell us about how we are going to do it, how we're going to live it, it's how the environment is going to be, it's not going to work. It's going to be how we are set up in our neighborhoods, I've had to sit in an arbitration setting recently with one of our smallholder farmers cooperative that had a fight with the church about the church has bewitched our crops. They failed to grow. But just because the church farmland has used hybrid seed, improved varieties and things. And then they're saying, look, you guys impact investors, come and tell us. Is this GMO or is this hybrid seed? What is it? The church is bewitching our crops and the rain is not doing it. So it's different. So I think for me, it's got to be Africanized, localized, and brought very different. So our learning from our rural African setting is not through the website, it's not through the smartphone. It's a different whole culture setting. Yes, and I think for me, I would rather even have a conversation about how do you trademark that? It's different. Right now, we think it's going to be the policy framework, the macro decisions, it's going to be the laws. Now we are regulating everything and everything. In Uganda, there's a whole talk about regulating bedroom matters. It's not going to work. It's different. So okay. Now my last point, which is the third one, is the point about what we are talking about. Even if we educate our graduates at Strathmore, even if we, and I'm glad, I mean, the Vice Chancellor is out, but one of the conversations I would love to have with him is, you've done that power plant, you're feeding power to the grid. When you did that, was it from your P&L in Strathmore, or was it because there was a grant subsidy that would help with the power plant, and therefore you have an opportunity to generate revenue for the university? Now, those discussions have got to be realistic. If we don't demystify them, then honestly, we can live and see sustainability and want to do it, but it's going to be the few elite or the few people, the mid-income earners, ourselves here in this room, but not the other masses down there that need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. And honestly, I'm resonating with a lot of what you said. Yesterday, there was a side event on media and also education. You know, how do we actually get the message out in a way that people can understand and appreciate? And I think we've actually not spent enough time on that. Sonia, we started with you. Let's end it with you, please.
So first, how do you follow that? So I think you deserve a very, very big clap for being real and practical. But I think I just ask a question. How many of you, before I said I work for Mr. Green, has ever even heard of Mr. Green Africa? Oh yeah, that's more than normal. Many people haven't, right? But if I ask this question at the Dandora dump site, if I asked it in Kibera, and I said, do you know Mr. Green? Everybody would have put their hand up, right? And you know, you touched on the point on the website was not designed for the Mr. Green's community, the waste picker, right? But on the ground, if they know you, that's important. But then again, why do they know us? And I think that's a key part, is you need to meet people at their point of need, okay? And I'm going to challenge perhaps even Highlands and biofoods at this point. Your product is not going to be sold to the community, right? Because it's higher price, right? For the efficiency you have and all of that, it is higher price, okay? So the question is, government must come in to help make sure that the products, like, you know, as he said, reward good behavior, but that way you also have to make it affordable for the people. But I think the point of need that I'd really have to say is, in Africa, we keep getting one thing wrong. And I have to say it. We keep going outside to look for solutions. And no one has ever asked the waste picker, the farmer, you know, the sun is shining more than normal. Rain is delayed. What do you think is a problem? How do you think we can solve it? Okay? And they wouldn't give you a fancy term like circular economy. They wouldn't tell you anything like that. But trust me, there will be something they will say that will plant the seed for the technological innovation of the same. So when it comes to communication, I would say we need to really start listening to the people who are most affected, as we like to say, the single mother, the woman in the village, the male, or whatever they are, and ask them what they think. And you'd be amazed at how Africa is very good at solving their own problems if we could just stop. And honestly, just stop looking outside all the time. There is, you know, there's inspiration you can get from Costa Rica and all these other countries. But Africa's problems, I can bet my money, my life on it, will be solved by Africans. And I think that's how I would close that.
Wow. What a good way to end the discussion. So I think for purposes of time, I know we can talk about this the whole day, as the ambassador said, but we have to stop because of time. Thank you so much to my panelists. I think we have learned a lot from your experiences. Thank you for joining us.